Welcome to episode 8 of Beyond the Lineup. Today we have a very special guest joining us. He is a longtime mentor of mine and the main reason that I actually started surfing in the first place. Beyond that, he was one of the dominating pro surfers of his era, taking out the Bud Tour and winning national championships. Later on in his career, he went on to become the team manager at Gotcha, managing quite a stacked team consisting of Matt Archibald, Martin Potter, Michael Ho, and Dino Andino, just to name a few. He is an incredible human and surfer inside out, and he had and continues to have a huge impact on the surfing community. He goes by the nickname of Happy, but is more formally known as Mike Cruickshank. Happy, welcome. We're so excited to have you on the show.
Thank you. That was very nice of you to say all those things. They're all not true. Okay.
No, they're all true.
She wrote it all herself.
Okay.
Yeah, but your real name is Mike Cruickshank, but since as long as I've known you, I've always called you Happy. What's the story behind that, and where does that nickname originate from?
Well, it's kind of a combination. There was a surf movie that I was involved with called Surfers the Movie, and when we were down in Mexico, there was a scene where we were talking at this little restaurant, and I said Potter's face went from happy to grumpy because I tied his leash in a knot. and then it kind of evolved from there. So when I'd be at the contest, I wouldn't sit with the normal crew, like in the stands and all that. I like to be on the beach with just the regular people, and I wouldn't yell their names because everybody's yelling their names. So what I would yell is Happy, and they knew it was me, and they're like, yeah, because then they knew that was how I separated. So that's how Happy came about.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is so rad. So I know you started surfing back in the 1960s, and if I remember correctly, your dad went to an old Hobie factory and found a broken blank and shaped that for you as your first surfboard. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you got into surfing and how that happened?
Yeah. Well, my dad, when we moved down here from Sherman Oaks, when I was really little, he started surfing. And when I was about 5 years old, he decided it was time for me to surf. So in Capo Beach, it's hard to kind of explain, but it's, anyway, that's where the Hobie factory was, and that's where all they, shaped and all that. But there was a broken tandem blank in the dumpster. So he grabbed one of the halves, took it home and shaped it, and it looked like a bar of soap. It was 6 feet long, and it had a big wooden fin, like those old school wooden fins on it. But that was my board. And I rode that probably like 3 years. And then when I got a little bit too big for it, then I started moving up in boards. Yeah.
That's hilarious. One man's trash is another man's surfboard.
Yeah, it was. Well, it's funny. That was my first board. Yeah, it's hilarious. The board, you always wish you could keep boards. That one, I wish I could keep it. I mean, that thing was, I can't even imagine what it looks like compared to, everything else now.
And boards were probably so different back then.
Yeah, they were. They were about 25 pounds.
Wow.
And
crap.
It was 8 ounce glass with the big thick stringer, with the gloss coat, and so a lot of that surfing back then, that's why they could never surf a lot of breaks, because they were limited just by the boards. They were real cumbersome. But for example, they were insane at Doheny.
Doheny was a big spot back in the day, right?
Yeah, Doheny was a huge spot. They even had songs about it and stuff like that. But the boards, they started evolving, and I think it was during the One World contest where Mickey Munoz and a group of the guys from up here went to Australia to surf in this contest, and the boards down there were so completely different. They're like, wow, So when they came back, you'd see these crazy V-tails, and you'd see these crazy different boards. And even though they were shorter than the old boards, but they were still like 7 feet long and stuff like that. So boards, those boards from I'd say the 69, 70, 71, they were crazy weirdo boards. Uh-huh. And then the boards got better. And then, but that was a result of going to the World Contest in Australia. Yeah.
So would you say the boards transitioned from the 60s, they were longer, to the 70s, now you're getting into short boards?
Yeah, it was, because everybody's on long boards, and then all of a sudden this new shortboard craze came in, and once you got on a shortboard, you're like, wow, this thing's a lot different, but they weren't that short. They were still we were still in the, I want to say 7 foot range, maybe 6'10" or something like that.
Yeah.
That was considered a shortboard because all the other boards were 9 feet long. But the Aussies, they were riding like 5/8 and like 6/0s and 6/2s. They had this one board called the Pig, and it was just round. And yeah,
That's so epic. And then in 1969, there was the very first pro surf contest in California, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
that was Steamer Lane in Santa Cruz.
No way.
Yeah,
Wow, that's so awesome. We were just surfing there.
yeah.
That's so epic. How did that contest come about, and how did that change pro surfing, or shortboarding, I guess, in California?
Well, the shortboards were in place, and what was funny about that too, shortboards were in place, and they actually kind of forgot though. Towards the end of the longboard era, going into the shortboard era, they started getting removable fins. So everything else was glassed in, but on the longboards and the single fins, there'd be a screw through the top of the deck, and you'd screw down into the fin, and that's how it'd go in. But anyway, getting back to the Smirnoff contest, it was up at Steamer Lane, and it was, I believe, in November, and it was really good. Like, this was my first time I'd been out of town surfing anywhere as a little guy, and here I get to Santa Cruz, and there's just, Cowles has the point, and then all these other points, and Indicators is rocking, and the lane's rocking, and I'm like, wow, this place is crazy.
Insane.
I loved surfing Cowles at the time because I was little, but that contest kind of morphed into something else because it started a big wave contest thing too afterward.
And back then, there was still no leashes, right?
Yeah,
so
no leashes.
Wait, let me ask you. So there's a surf contest in Santa Cruz. You're from Capo Beach.
Yeah.
The water's way warmer down here, I would say. Were there wetsuits in that
they were
era?
horrible.
They were horrible.
Yeah, that's a great question. So back then, you had a long john and sleeves.
No way.
And the long john would be about a 1/4 inch thick, and the sleeves would be about a 1/4 inch thick. So you'd have a 1/2 inch thick in the middle. And they were, and then they got better. And then I want to say O'Neill came up with what they called the SEAL suit, which was the first one that was basically
full body.
Yeah, full body. Yeah.
Was that with the flaps in the back?
Yeah, the old beaver tails. Yeah,
the beaver tails.
Yeah, those were brutal. And
why?
By themselves, they were okay, but when you coupled them up with the wetsuit, it was really bad. It was real cumbersome. But so you got to look at the boards too. The boards, they'd spin out. Those wetsuits were horrible. But anyway, yeah, that's a great thing, because at that contest, their guys lost their boards. They were up on the rocks. It was ruined.
Oh,
wow,
for sure.
That's so gnarly. Probably just like when the waves get big, is it just like boards flying everywhere, or just people trying to hold on to their board for dear life?
Well, they would just hold on. So it was duck dive. There was no duck dive. What it basically was, paddle and turtle, or just turn the other way and just hold on for dear life.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so gnarly.
Yeah.
That's crazy to think
But
about.
that contest, there's a couple rides in particular that were crazy. Reno Avalera caught one out at Middle Peak, rode it through Indicators, into Cowles, all the way to the pier.
Wow.
It's like the longest ride.
Yeah, never got another wave. Some guy, I guess, had a truck, and they tried to get back,
Yeah, how do you even judge by that
Yeah,
point? He's
and
like
then-
all the way far gone down the beach.
And then, as you know, with Santa Cruz, if the tide gets too high, the lane just shuts down.
Yeah, it
There's
becomes a
nothing
lake.
there. So all of a sudden, we're driving to Moss Landing. They moved
Oh,
the
no
whole
way.
event over to Moss Landing.
Wow.
What? They were able to do that back in the day?
Yeah, and then we
Did
moved.
you need permits back in the day for contests, or did you just kind of show up and post up?
I think you could actually kind of get them on the spot. Anyway, so the tide got lower, and when we left, there was not a thing breaking. We come back, the tide's low. Middle Peak's like 6 to 8 feet solid. Everything's just rifling. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that, actually, because I was up in Santa Cruz last weekend for a surf contest, and it was like a 5.5 foot high tide, and the waves were pretty small, and it ended up being a lake. They had to cancel the contest because it was flat. It just, it wasn't breaking. But going into the 70s, I know surf movies were pretty big. How did they come about, and how did surf movies impact your generation? Because I know there was a few that you mentioned that were huge. But
Well, yeah, surf movies were huge because it was a big social event, for one. And they weren't at your normal theaters. They weren't at Edwards. They weren't at, whatever the theaters they have now. They were at high school auditoriums. You wouldn't believe the surf movies I saw at Laguna Beach High School Auditorium.
No way.
Or San Clemente. Or Sebastian's Playhouse. Actually, we housed a few surf movies. But they were a lot different and more grassrootsy. But they were completely hilarious because it was always comedy in the movies. There was always something they did in the movies that was just completely dumb. But they were really big because for us here, we had like for example, the Pipe Masters just ended today, right?
Yeah.
Watch the whole thing, da-di-da-di-da. You can watch it right live, DDD. Back then, the Pipe Masters would happen, and you wouldn't be able to watch it until June
Wow.
on
Oh
Wide
my
World of
gosh.
Sports, and then guys would be you couldn't even watch all the waves. You just get certain clips of it.
5 months later.
So
Just see like whatever you
Yeah.
could get. Yeah.
so the surf movies, what they did was they had all the great clips of all the guys surfing. And at the time, Hawaii was the bomb. Hawaii was it. There was nowhere else. And so you could see all your heroes surfing, Sunset Pipe, Haleiwa, V-Land, wherever it was, and they were fun. They were fun movies. And that at that time too, the culture was a little different. There was a lot of how can I say a lot of aromatic smells coming from the parking lot. And some guys with bloodshot eyes look like road maps, yeah, and they would, yeah.
One of my favorite surf movies that got me into surfing, I would say, is like the first Endless Summer, and that came out in the 60s. Like my grandpa
Yeah.
showed me that. And I think would you say that's the first like worldwide surf movie?
That's the one that went to all the theaters. That was one that went to all the theaters,
Like the Edwards?
yeah, went to Edwards and all that. My family saw it at the San Juan Drive-In Theater. There was a drive-in theater in San Juan.
Oh,
And we pulled the car up, and that's where we first saw it. And what's funny about that movie is he'd been trying to get his movies going, but that one just hit home.
Yeah.
But there's so many scenes in it that aren't really where they said it was at.
Really?
Yeah. So like the guy that he comes jumping out of the bushes with his face painted, like
Oh, yeah.
he's like, well, that was Bruce in his bushes off Violet Lantern in Capo Beach. That was, in Dana Point. That wasn't in Africa.
Oh my god!
And
And
then-
they were.
You're kidding.
No, and then
No way.
those dunes that they had to go down
Yeah.
and down and down. No, what they were doing was they're going down one, and then they have to go around to another one around the back, and then come down another one so they wouldn't see the steps. So
You're kidding.
No way.
Yeah.
Hollywood.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, it was Hollywood all the way. But
What?
amazing movie, and they now know that there is surf in Tahiti because that was a big part of the movie. There's no surf in Tahiti. Well,
Yeah.
there's surf in Tahiti. Anyway, getting back to the 70s, because I was about these surf movies. So there's Pacific Vibrations. It won't go to DVD or whatever now because the rights with the music. There's really like
Wow.
Crosby, Stills and Nash and Cream and all these different ones. Then there was another one called Free Ride. And those were in the 70s. And those are huge movies because they had big influences on kind of what's going on. Rick Griffin has got a part in the movie in Pacific Vibrations. At the end, they take an old school bus and they paint it. And he's got flying eyeballs and surfing and, all this stuff painted all over it. And they take a group of surfers and they drive up to the ranch. And they pick some girls up on the way and they go surfing the ranch. And it's the actual time when you can watch, like, the ranch when it's only like 2 to 3 feet. But you can see what it's like. It's an amazing wave. But so that was a really cool movie. But it never got to be released because of the music rights.
No, you're kidding.
Yeah, so it was kind of like you got to watch it a few times and it was gone.
Was the ranch
Wow.
always private?
Yeah.
Always?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. How do you think surf movies back in the day influenced surf culture?
Well, see, that was our only ticket to watching our guys surf. Like, you can turn on the TV and there's an NFL game or NBA game or whatever. So you can actually watch, right? But this was our ticket to watching these guys because it wasn't like now where you get instant gratification on the cell phone, social media, whatever. It wasn't like that back then. Everything was all delayed. So, and then like I said, it was a social event. Because it was a big deal. Like we had to get on your best surf clothes and, make sure you look good for.
What were some of the surf brands like in the 70s?
Hang Ten, Jansen, OP was just starting. I want to say they started around then, but Hang Ten and Jansen were big back in the 60s. And then going into the 70s, it would have been OP was big going into the 70s. I want to say Quicksilver was starting in the 70s, but they first started out, I believe, as Golden Breed
Wow.
and then changed into Quicksilver.
I know that Hawaiian surfers, you said Hawaii was huge back in the day. So how did Hawaiian surfers like Jerry Lopez and Jack Hackman shape the future of surfing?
Well, that was again through the movies.
Yeah.
Like Five Summer Stories. You get to watch Lopez at Pipeline. It's just beautiful, you know, and then Hackman. So the guys were so different in their styles and the way they approached the waves. Like Hackman was a muscle man. He had, you know, I mean, he was just like, he was a muscle man, and he, like, it was all about the bottom turn and coming up, and he had some crazy moves at sunset where he'd take off on the west peak, way outside, not on the inside, he'd take off on the way outside, and he'd fade left, and then he'd use the left as like a wedge, and he'd kind of churn off of that and come back around.
Wow.
Kind of almost like what Robo did last year when he got that barrel.
Oh, yeah.
But on a different scale. But so Hackman was kind of the power surfer. You know, he had the bottom turn in that.
And back then, it was mostly single fins, and then
Oh, it was
maybe
all
a couple.
single fins.
Wow, that's so technical. I feel like to be able to surf waves that big and like that and hold your rail.
Yeah, because there were a lot of spin outs. But then Lopez was, don't get him silky, smooth style, you know. Don't let that fool you, because the guy had a wicked frontside snap. And that kind of gets lost in the translation. But if you watch them surf in real life, you go, whoa, like you're kind of waiting to see this, but it's like, bam. Yeah.
And he had the killer like art on his surfboard. Like everyone knows the lightning bolt is
Well,
Gary
the lightning
Lopez.
bolt, yeah.
Would you say were sponsorships around that time in that era? Or was it a little bit after that you started seeing?
Jansen and those guys were sponsoring guys.
Was it on the board?
Kind of, not really logos on the board, but they'd be featured in ads. You'd see them in the gear running up the thing. Caton was Birdwell Britches, Caton. Those were kind of the 70s.
And moving on into the 80s, I know the OP Pros became big.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about those contests? And I know you were in the first final, right, for the first OP Pro?
Yeah, and if we backtrack to the late 50s through the 60s into the early 70s, the U.S. championships were held at Huntington Pier. So then now we're going to go forward. The U.S. championship wasn't at Huntington Pier, and went to Malibu. And then it went from Malibu to the East Coast, and then it kind of dissolved. It was weird. There was kind of a weird dissolving. So the first OP was, I believe, 1980 at T Street.
No way. That's awesome.
Oh, good old T Street.
Yeah. And I ended up, and it was supposed to be where they had, the way it set it up, they had it set up to where it was man on man, and the way the seating bracket was, Joey Baran was on this side and Greg Mungle was on this side. Well, Mungle didn't get through, and it ended up, I ended up surfing against Joey in the final.
Wow, that's so
And that was that's when I first met Joey.
Did you take him?
No, he beat me. And it was crazy because PT was a judge, Larry Bertelman was a judge, and Rusty Priesendorfer was a judge. And these guys were judging. Anyway, no, I didn't beat him. But then the next year, I ended up, I don't know if it was the next year they had it or the year after, but the very next OP they had at Huntington, and I made it to the main event, and I lost to Terry Richardson. He used to call him Richo. He's from Australia, goofy foot guy. And then the next year, I got to the quarters, and I lost to Joey again in the quarters. But that was like, and that's the one Curran won, and that's the place. Like, it was a lot different back there. There must have been 30,000 people just looking at surfing. There was no BMX. There was no half pipe. There was no anything else. It was all about the surf.
That's so incredible. When did all the other sports come into play before, like, when did it start to kind of take away from the surfing? Because, I feel like nowadays you go to the U.S. Open and there's so much going on that, like, most of the people, like, there's definitely people watching the surfing, but I feel like a lot of eyes are on a bunch of different sports.
Probably, I want to say that probably started in the 80s somewhere. I'm not too sure where, because I know Ian Cairns had taken over that, and I know all of a sudden I started seeing this stuff opening up. But that I'm not too sure. I do know though that for example, like the one U.S. championship that I did well in, that we were talking about, that was in '72. Well, that was their first riot.
Wow.
There was a riot there.
Wow.
Yeah. It was right after I left. Yeah, at Huntington. Right after I left, place went bonkers, bananas. There was a complete riot.
What started the riot?
Well, they'd sell alcohol on Main Street and, whatever, it gets going, right? But then, what's funny is because then you fast forward, and then I think it was 87, 88, they had another riot. I want to say it was 80 something around then, and that's the one guy on my team, Martin Potter. He got stuck in the competitors area.
Oh my god.
with the guy we called Mr. T. He was a security guard, and he worked with me at Gotcha. He worked in the back. He was in charge of the shipping and receiving area. Anyway, so this is a great story. So Martin's back there and he's kind of panicking because it's going crazy, right? So he sees this one guy jump over the fence. It's like a 6-foot fence.
Oh my god.
And his other two buddies going, yeah, because it was the competitors area. The other two guys, they jump up and they get right about here and they look up and they see their buddy flying over their head like this. And they go, oh, shit. Well, that was Mr. T. He launched that guy right out of there. And they looked in there and saw him, went, oh, there's no way we're going in there.
Oh, my gosh.
So.
Wow, that's so gnarly. You never see that nowadays.
No,
yeah.
like this was crazy. But there was they think the way it started was there was the bikini contest going on because that was a big deal too.
So the bikini contest was in tandem with the surf contest, kind of happening
with
side
the
by
surf
side.
contest, but it was set back. And there's this restaurant called Maxwell's, and it has a glass partition that goes across that. But it's like, so you're sitting there eating, but there's glass there. Mm-hmm. There's the bikini contest. Well, evidently, one of the girls at Maxwell's, pretty well endowed, said, hey, and pressed him up against the glass. And that's what I heard, and the whole place, that was it.
Wow, and that just started a whole riot.
That's a great way to bring people
That's
to
what
surfing.
I heard. That could be a big fib, but that was the general rumor.
What year was that? Was that the second riot?
I want to say that had to be 80. It was after I started working Gotcha, which had been 86. So I'd probably say 87, 88, somewhere around there.
That's classic.
Yeah.
And were these guys making good money when they were winning the contests?
They were doing okay.
Could you make a living off of surfing? In the 80s? You could?
Yeah. So a lot of things with the way because you got to remember, expenses were a lot less than they are now. Guys were making, they're making up to $100,000 a year or whatever, which today that's peanuts, but it was a lot, it was a lot easier. But there was a lot more events. Like, I want to say 1 year Potter might have surfed in 30 events.
Wow.
For the whole year.
How many stops were there on tour, like when the tour first started?
Oh, like I said, there was a lot of events, but guys didn't go to every event. They went to the key ones, for their, because some events were rated a little bit different than others. 100%. But yeah. But the other thing is, glad you brought that up about back then, is that, so when I was managing Gotcha, I got to have Dino and Brock Little and Martin Potter and Jerry Lopez and Shane Horan and Matt Archibald and Derek Ho and Michael Ho and Sonny Garcia and Mike Stewart, the bodyboarder, and these are my pros that I had, right?
Wow. And when did you become team manager of Gotcha, and how did that come about?
86.
Wow.
So there's a story to that. But anyway, that's the team I had. But on top of that, we had to carry at least 100 amateurs. That was standard.
That's awesome.
That was standard.
Wow.
No matter if you were Quicksilver, Billabong, Rusty, whoever it was that at the time, that standard was 100 because it was a big grassroots thing. It was a lot of grassroots.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's super interesting that you mention the grassroots and having 100+ amateurs on every team, because I feel like nowadays it's like teams are getting skinned alive. There's maybe 6 to 7 surfers and you don't see as many amateurs. How do you think surfing and surf teams have evolved? Because I feel like back in the day, do you think that having that many amateurs influenced how many eyes were on surfing?
Oh, it's the thing about having all those amateurs is what you're doing is not only supporting the amateurs, but you're supporting the surf shops that have the amateurs, because a lot of those, that's how you got them. And so the grassroots really fed back into the surf shops, which really fed back into the whole thing. And because you were so good in the grassroots, then all of a sudden the big shops, they wanted you. So you had to play a balancing act there, because you could be in the really high-end ones, the real fou-flaroos, but you couldn't be in the high volume ones, like JCPenney's or something, which I don't even know if they're around anymore. But
Yeah.
no, the grassroots amateurs was huge. And I feel that's a big suffering now, because you go to a contest and you'll see some kids running around with logos on their boards. They can't surf worth a damn, and these other kids don't have any logos on their boards, and they're the better surfers, but they're not sponsored because of so and so knows somebody or whatever. And that's why the one kid got sponsored. It's crazy.
Yeah, and when do you think that started happening, and when did the grassroots kind of start falling apart?
I think when the companies started going public and they started expanding that way, I think they started having to want to make sure they had this guy, that guy, this guy, that guy. But the problem for me, like, I have a problem with that because let's say you take California money out of the equation. So let's say there's a guy that surfs for Rip Curl who's really, he makes a ton of dough, right? Mm-hmm. But by the time he gets his ton of dough, there's no money for any California surfers. But if we were to take California money out of the equation, he would make the ton of dough.
Yeah.
So I have a little beef with that because, to me, California gets kind of treated weird on a number of scales. Like, we only have one CT event, and we have a couple, 3 stars or whatever.
Yeah.
But there should be more. And then the other thing I don't like is, like, California surfers, like, they should be, they got to step up to the plate and get the job done, obviously. But at the same time, they're not treated properly, I don't think.
I feel like today, at least, you don't see, like, that rock star mentality that you used to see back in the day with, like, putting surfers on a pedestal. Like, today, like, you just see a surfer and you're like, oh, he's just another surfer. Like, there's Griffin walking down the beach, Yeah. What do you think happened there?
Well, I think that's kind of... So, like, Quicksilver had this ad campaign, and it had Elkerton, and it had, I want to say, Chappie Jennings, and somebody else on this car hood. And it said, and this is their ad campaign, it says, if you can't party, then don't fucking come.
Wow.
I mean, and that's, but that stuff was like, it was that edgy kind of stuff, right? And it was, the guys were a little more edgy, like Potter, like, he was real edgy. Different guys, it was I think what's happened is that surfing's got more professional with training, workouts, diets, that type of thing. So a lot of that, rock star kind of temperament of, guys raging all night and then surfing in the contest the next day winning, that's gone. But it's the rock star itself, like, here's typical back in the day with Nueva. Nueva would show up in a Jaguar. It's like, looked like an old Rolls. That's how they looked. They were a big old white car. He'd get out, he had a big fur coat on. He'd walk down to the beach. The guy that drove the car would run down with a hanger, take the fur coat off.
Wow.
Nueva was already in his wetsuit. Then the guy would have Nueva's board and he'd wax it up, give it to him.
Kidding me?
No, not kidding. And then as soon as Nueva would come in, he'd come running in, give him a towel, take his board, put it in the car, and then, yeah.
Who is this guy?
David Nueva?
Yeah.
Yeah, David Nueva at one time was probably arguably best surfer in the world.
Wow.
But he won. He was a guy that made the transition from longboard to shortboard because he surfed in the World Championships at Ocean Beach on a longboard and had, I believe, a 10-second nose ride in the finals.
Wow.
And then he surfed in the same World Championship later, but he was riding a fish.
Wow.
Yeah.
Won it on a fish.
Yeah. No, he actually didn't win it on a fish, but he was a rock star.
Yeah.
And then who else? Rabbit Bartholomew.
Oh yeah.
Oh God, are you kidding me? He was all about, like, these guys had charisma, they had flair, they had they were just different.
Yeah, I feel like back then all the pro surfers just had more edge to them, I feel like now all the edge from surfers have been removed. Everything is so, like, I guess, scripted, and it's a bummer to see because I feel like even just looking at the surf world now, we don't see, I guess, the same energy and the same realness that we saw back in the day.
Yeah, like I said, it was a little different. They could kind of speak their mind back then, like, the waves suck or this and that, and there's no way, now, yeah. Which I kind of understand. Like, this one contest we had in Hawaii, this guy won, and we gave him a brand new Honda.
Wow.
but on stage, this is the type of thing where professionalism is better now than then. But on stage, he goes, "Yeah, that's a nice one, but I wanted the Prelude, which was the better car." I'm like, "Really? You said that?"
Wow.
Like,
That's
with
so
the
gnarly.
with the Honda dealer right
Yeah.
there. That's
Hey,
giving the
nowadays,
car
if
away.
you said that, I think
Oh, yeah.
WSL would fine them like a couple $1,000s and not let
They
them
should.
compete for another 3 contests
They
or
should, but
something.
then-
But that drives away sponsors,
Yeah.
right?
But
Yeah.
then, like, but then you had other guys that would get up there and be real, charismatic, and they'd make a speech and they'd kind of draw you in, but they could say what they wanted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess, what are your thoughts on how scripted everything is now? Like, with the WSL, like, I know I was talking to a couple of people who were just talking about the post-heat interviews and how they can't talk about even the waves being bad or the conditions being poor. So I feel like everyone just shows up on their post-heat interview, like, all smiley, and it's almost, like, too scripted, where it's super forced and they can't even really speak their minds. Everyone's just up there, like, smiling, saying the same thing, you know?
Yeah. No, well, for example, the first day of the pipe sucked.
Yeah.
I mean, plain out simple sucked. And towards the end of the day, there's some heats that were like, they couldn't get tubed. I mean,
Yeah.
scores were low. I mean, and to me, they should be able to come out and go, wow, man, the conditions, they're really bad. Like,
Yeah.
at least say that. Maybe not say sucked, but they can't even say anything like that. They got to come out and say, well, it was really testing for everybody or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And no. And to me, that's why some of the other commentators that were there before left.
Yeah, and you're talking Martin Potter, right? He was one of them.
Oh, yeah, no,
right?
he's not a scripted guy.
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
think like they have that mindset just because they're trying to stay positive and make their heats and like keep this positive energy around them?
Well, I think it's like I said, the professional part, kind of moving in, like, trying to keep it professional. I think they kind of maybe how can you say, the pendulum swung too far about having to keep it too professional, because surfers are a little different breed. We're not made of the same cloth as
No,
a
not
football
at all.
player or a basketball player.
Yeah.
That's a team sport. We're individuals. We express ourselves individually when we surf, and the wave is our canvas. And so when we paint, that's kind of our expression. Some are power surfers, some are whatever. But yeah, I think they should be able to express themselves a little bit more and be able to talk more freely. Everybody knows it's scripted. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
you
not
can
like
tell that it's scripted. You could, and I think it's super interesting because I think that's honestly one of the big inspirations for Beyond the Lineup and even starting a podcast in the first place, was just feeling like the conversations were so scripted and the post-heat interviews and just in general, and we wanted the realness, the rawness that we knew surfing to be, and we wanted to bring that back.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely been super interesting just seeing how much things have evolved. But I wanted to ask you, kind of back to Gotcha and your managing days, how did you become team manager and how did that come about?
So I was surfing Bud Tour, and I got approached by Michael Thompson. That's Creek. Told me to come up, get interviewed. So I got the job. So the day I won the Bud Tour, the next day I had to be at work.
Wow.
So I couldn't party or anything.
Oh,
That was a big deal for me. It was a really big deal. So
Yeah, because
But
it's a
I-
huge job at the time,
Yeah.
managing like a team of
Well,
all the
and-
best surfers
yeah.
in the world.
well, I had Shane Horan and Potter and all these guys. Anyway, so I walked in and just put the trophy on my boss's desk and go, well, he goes, huh? He was pumped because all of a sudden his speech at the next sales meeting was better.
oh my gosh.
Yeah, because he just, this Mike just won, da-dee-dee-dee-do, right? Yeah. So, yeah. But I got it through Michael Thompson, and what was it was an eye-opener for me because there was a guy there named Matt Flotho. And while I was at the end of my Bud Tour days, he'd come and pick me up. He'd drive me up to the events because he had to go too, and we became really good friends. That was the
Yeah.
team guy, right?
Yeah.
Well, I got in there and started working. Well, they were edging him out and putting me in,
Wow.
and I didn't realize it. And then I finally saw what was going on, and Michael looks at me and goes, "Listen, do you want the job, or do you want Joey DeBrand to get it?" Because he knew I had a real rivalry with Joey.
Wow.
And I was like, F that. I'm not going to let Joey beat me on something else, right? So I took the job. But Matt was a great guy. He was a super good guy. Like, to this day, I cherish the time I had with
Yeah.
Matt. But anyway, that's how that started.
And then your team was really stacked. Like Matt, Archibald, Dino.
Well,
and
he came
Dino.
later, and they came later.
How was managing a team like that stacked and with so much different personality?
Well, what's funny was Derek Ho was the consummate professional. He'd give you grief, but he was there right on time for his heat. He was there practicing. The logos were in place. Everything was there. Bing,
Wow.
bing, bing. The other guys were kind of woo wee, and you had to kind of like, oh my gosh, hey, your heat. Oh yeah, I forgot, right? like, like Shane Horan won this contest at Billabong, and before his final starts, the guy that was caddying for him, John Orr, he's got his two boards and he's walking down Cam Highway, spaced out or whatever, going out the wrong way with his boards before the finals.
Oh my
He had to go
God.
chase him down. But with that group, they're really intense.
Yeah.
And there was times when you literally had to take your ego, open your wallet, put it in there like a billfold, fold your wallet, and put it in your pocket because you didn't have any say.
I remember when I was talking to you, you were kind of mentioning that every single person on your team, they were all kind of like rock stars. What was it like managing a team like that back in the day? And I guess what were the surfers like?
Well, they're like I said, there's such different group of them. Like Potter, for example, that was Guns N' Roses and just Jack and Cokes and just pedal to the metal. And then you had Shane Horan, who was like, he'd be doing yoga and he'd be like incense and he'd be like chanting. And then you had guys like Archibald, who was more on the Potter side with a little bit of I don't know how do you say, but a little bit of rockabilly in there. and then Dino was, he kind of more Dino was Dino. I don't even know how to explain that, but Dino had his own thing going, and he was a bit like that. Then you had Derek Ho, who was a consummate professional, and he was always on time, but he was all about reggae. So I guess if you were to break down the music, it would be Potter was full on hard rock, Archie was full on like rockabilly, kind of punk, kind of hard rock. Dino and Dino, probably a little bit more reggae. The rest of the guys, for sure, Michael and Derek Ho, full on reggae.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you had Mike Stewart, the bodyboarder, and he'd won like all these world championships, and he was real clean cut. Like,
Yeah.
he almost didn't fit like in with everybody else.
Yeah.
That's crazy because nowadays I feel like the Hurley team is known as like the clean cut surfers.
Yeah,
But like you were mentioning, gotcha, like everyone's different.
yeah.
So that like how did you pick the team?
Oh no, the team we picked was not. You had to surf really good. You had to be a good surfer. You had to be, title contender, all that. But you also had to be like, you couldn't be like Opie Taylor in the Andy Griffith Show. You had to have some edge about you. Like,
Yeah.
there was something about you like that you had to have, and you had to have a bit of cool factor. Because there was a lot of guys that were on tour that were good surfers, but they were definitely kind of like, they were just sterile.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
I feel like nowadays I don't want to say there aren't any cool surfers on tour, but it's like the way that things are structured now, it's like people have way less opportunity or freedom to show the edge they have to them and the different sides of them. So it's super interesting hearing about back in the day.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, do you have any crazy stories from managing a team like that? Because it sounds like every single person on your team was their own character and had a lot going on.
Well, there's a couple. One was Matt. We had a Bud Tour contest in Ventura, and he all of a sudden got sick. Like, we had to rush him to emergency, and something happened to his stomach, like flipped out inside out or something really weird. And I had to go get him. He'd already surfed his heat, so he'd already advanced, but I had to go get him that night. Anyway, it's about 12:30 at night, and I picked him up from emergency, and we're in the lobby, and here comes some judge, hammered, telling Matt's in his hospital fatigues, the
Yeah,
hospital
yeah.
gown and all that, and this guy's hammered going, "This was bad because you got to surf tomorrow." Matt's looking at me going, "Oh my gosh." I go, "Yeah, well, needless to say, Matt won the contest the next
Wow.
day."
Wow.
But-
from gallons to
From
first
being in
place
emergency
finishes.
with some weird something, we don't, and then having that, yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I kind of really wanted to start talking about Tom Curran because I feel like he started winning those world titles in the 80s.
Yeah.
How did that like influence everybody surfing? Because I feel like he changed the game.
He was, well, what it was is you could freeze frame him anywhere in a movie, and he had perfect style. So,
Wow.
but, you know, you can't get lost in that because he had crazy maneuvers.
Yeah.
He had a front side snap that was wicked. His backside was wicked. Then he could place himself in position on waves. And then if you surfed against him at Huntington, it's like he will paddle out to where nothing has broken. 2 hours, the tide's getting higher, nothing's going to break. And the guardian angel at Huntington Pier sends him a swell. It pops up, and next thing you know, he's S-ing in, he's blowing by everybody. And yeah, and then his boards, you know, because I remember watching him going, God, I got to ride his boards. So they're all tapered, and I'm all getting them all nice, you know, outlines and this and that. Then there was a stupid movie called Searching for Tom Curran, and he's at some right-hander down in Indo on 10-foot surf riding a fish. That killed me.
Why'd that kill you?
Because I spent all this time tapering my boards to what he was riding, then he did that. Like, really? Like, yeah, but I watched him just down guys. Like one guy in particular from San Clemente had a heat with him, and it was like at the OP Pro, and the guy caught a couple waves, and he got like a 6 and a 6.5. Anyway, Tom gets his first wave, 8. Next wave, 8. Next wave, like 8. That was it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because it was best 3. There
Oh
wasn't
yeah,
best 2.
back then. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. Back then, it was best out of 3, right?
Yeah.
What was judging like back in the day, and what were the judges like? What was competing like?
Best out of 3 waves?
Best 3 out of 10 waves, or best 3 out of unlimited. So they'd score your best 3 rides.
That's so awesome.
Yeah. Kelly and those guys, I believe, came up with the best 2 to get rid of all the hassling. Because there was a lot of hassling going on. Because, I mean, let's say you're in a 4-man heat and you need 3 waves instead of 2.
It's not enough time, huh?
Well, especially
How long were the heats back then? Were they 30 minutes or was it shorter?
the tour events like the OP and that, they'd be a little longer, but the trials heats, no, I think they were like 20 minutes long.
Wow, 20
Yeah.
minutes long, best 3 waves.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not. And what was priority like?
Then there was a buoy.
Wow, so back in the day, there was a buoy for priority.
Yeah.
Wait, talk to me about that.
So you'd start off, everybody'd start off even, you paddle through the pier, right? And then, let's say a guy caught a wave. Well, now you're out there, but let's say you want to make sure you keep priority. I believe this is the way it worked. You could paddle out around the buoy, then when the guy come back out, you have priority. So what it came down to was basically after you caught a wave, you just go immediately and paddle around the buoy, because the buoy wasn't that too far out past the lineup. But it was almost better to do that because as soon as the guy took off, you have priority. So you always made sure you had priority. Then there was times when you had to time it right because you could see a set coming and going, oh, I could go out and get priority, but I'm going to miss something. So,
Yeah.
you know, it's...
I mean, we've all seen that video of Rob Machado and Kelly Slater at Huntington Pier, where Rob's like on the inside, like looks like he's totally going to get the wave, and Kelly goes right around him somehow. Or was it Shane Beshin?
I think it was Shane Beshin.
I think it was Shane Beshin. Yeah, we've all seen that video with Shane Beshin and Kelly.
Yeah.
And that was just like the worst. Like if Shane just went around the buoy, right, he would have been completely fine. But how often did guys go around the buoy to get priority?
Oh, they went around it. We had our paddle battles. I actually liked it because it required a little bit more excitement for the
Right?
I'm sure there were some pretty gnarly paddle battles.
Oh,
huh?
no,
During the waiting time, now there's a little freaking battle between the guys getting priority.
Then they started going away from that and just getting it out to the general area. But like there was one, there was a Stubbies event down at Lowers, and I had this heat with this guy named Mark Theodore, and he was on the NSSA team. And the NSSA team, they were coming up and they were taking all of our sponsorships from all us other guys. So there was a crew of us that had a real thing for the NSSA team. Like we were not going to let them take it. So I'm in the quarters with this guy, and we're starting to paddle up the point, and we're paddling as hard as I can, and I'm paddling, and as I'm paddling, I'm grabbing the rail of his board and sliding it back, rail the board, and I just keep my paddle going like it's part of the deal. And part of the thing was I got to give my dad a hand on this because I had to swim in high school. I played water polo, so I had to swim more in high school. So you start learning, especially water polo, you start learning how to kind of do things and stay in motion. So what I did, my thing was trick-wise, I'd paddle, grab the rail, go back, but it looked like I was just in one motion. He was just going back and back. And then I got out there,
Was that a big thing back in the day during paddle battles? Would people do that a lot, grab each other's rails and push it back?
Oh yeah, and then if in Hawaii there was guys that would tell you they're going to beat you up if you caught a wave.
No
Damn, that's
way.
so
Yeah.
gnarly.
Well, I feel like nowadays, like, you see guys fighting, like, in a contest,
Yeah.
but then right when they get out of the water, like, beef stops.
Yeah.
Did you see that back in the day, or were there scraps on the beach?
Oh, there were gnarly scraps. Like
No way.
gnarly scraps. Like
What did you see?
mostly the gnarly scraps I ever saw were in Hawaii. Like
Wow.
there was this one where it's pro class trials and it's solid 8-foot sunset. It's perfect sunset though. I mean, it's peeling off the point, so you could take off on the point and backdoor the West Bowl and go all the way through. It was one of those
Wow.
days. And this one guy got into it with one of this other guy, and this one guy's just pounding him, and I'm watching an 8-foot wave break on his head like it was no big deal.
Wow.
Like-
During a contest?
Yeah, during the heat.
During the heat, no
During the
way.
heat, yeah. And then this was like, yeah.
It's so gnarly.
Oh yeah.
Nowadays, you'd be like banned from contests for a year, if not like forever. I don't even want to think about what would happen.
Oh no, it
Yeah.
was gnarly. See, there was a time when when you went to Hawaii, you had to really live by a code.
Wow. There's a video, actually, I think, of, like, Michael Rodriguez in a Hawaiian, and the Hawaiian, like, throws his board at the Brazilian, like, punches him.
Yeah.
That guy, like, that was, like, 5 years ago, banned from the WSL for, like, a year.
Yeah.
Couldn't surf a single contest.
Yeah. Oh, that was I know what you're talking about. It wasn't Dusty Payne. It was
the Maui boy.
Yeah.
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 That was crazy to see.
Yeah.
It kind of shook everyone, but it might have, like, taken localism away from Hawaii a little bit.
Yeah, it's nothing like it was. When we were going there, they literally called it Cowboys and Indians. And it was just, oh yeah. Like,
Wow.
no, you had to really watch your P's and Q's, but you learned respect. Like, and then once you gained the respect of the Hawaiians, oh, then they were family. Then they were on your side.
That's so awesome.
Yeah.
And it sounded like you were working really closely, having the hose on your team. So it
Yeah.
sounds like you ended up getting pretty close with a lot of the Hawaiians while you were out there, right?
Well, the one in particular, Derek, we're in France, and he just, in that winter in Hawaii, he beat Elkerton. And anyway, he just got out of his heat in France, and these French guys were all, this is in Lacanau, they're all like ganging up on him. There's about 6 of them. So I get over there, and I get Derek behind me, and I told the one guy, hey man, this ain't happening. You're not doing this. And he starts off, and I go, fuck, you're not doing this right here, my guy. That's not going to happen. Well, then the guys were going, okay, and they're kind of backing off, and I'm like, yeah, that's right. I'm kind of thinking I'm kind of tough. I look behind me, oh, the Hawaiians, pop, 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 pop. So the Hawaiians on tour, all of a sudden, they were behind me. Now these guys are going, oh, this doesn't look good. But because of that, I stuck up for them. That was huge for me because, they saw that I was on their side.
Yeah.
Yeah, ultimately. And that's huge, yeah.
So in professional surfing, what were some of, like, the craziest rivalries in the 80s and 90s that you were seeing?
Well, there was obviously what we were discussing was the Aki Curran one, Aki and Elko down there at Bell's. But Derek Ho and Tom Carroll had a crazy one. Because these guys would charge pipe like nobody's business. And there's one where Derek's trying to drop in at second reef, and Tom flips it up underneath him and airdrops, and then comes off the bottom, and he does that snap.
Wow.
And so, and then you had that going on, right? And then the Potter rivalries was with Curran, but Curran always beat him. It was just like Curran, he couldn't beat Curran. Sonny had a rivalry too going with everybody.
Sonny versus the world?
Yeah, it was Sonny versus the world. But I'd have to say the Derek Ho Carroll, because that wasn't just one pipe event. That was a couple pipe events he did that.
Well, towards the end of the 80s, we kind of see, like, the momentum generation guys, like Kelly, Shane Beshin, Rob Machado.
Yeah.
How did those guys influence surfing? Because I feel like there's a whole movie about them, like, staying in a house at Pipe, like, right in front of Pipe, and they just started sending at a young age.
No, that's funny you say that, because Potter and Elkerton and Carroll and those guys, they were kind of a overflow or an aftermath of Simon Anderson and that group. Simon Anderson, who invented the thruster.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Those guys could drink. But then Potter and those guys, they were kind of a aftermath. And then Kelly's new group was kind of like, they're clean, they're mean, and their fighting machine, like they were really clean and mean, and so they brought a whole new fresh look about it. And I remember when Potter came in, I had one of those new Taylor Steele movies with Kelly in it.
Yeah.
Oh, he lost his mind when he saw that video. He was so pissed off.
Why was he pissed?
Because he wasn't in the video, and because these guys were surfing, and anyway, you could see it coming. Like you could see, because Ross Williams basically took Shane Horan out of the CT for good. But Shane Dorian, Rob Machado, Kelly Slater, Benji Weatherly, all these guys, but they were all clean and mean. And
like,
Slater,
and by clean mean you mean less of the partying and more of the focus on surfing,
yeah, they weren't drinking, they weren't snorting, they weren't staying up all night. They might have a beer or whatever, but they were more having fun, but they were on it. Yeah. And there was a place in Hawaii near Laniakea, a place called Ronald Hill's house. It was a guy we sponsored on Gotcha. Anyway, Kelly, Pat, Brock. You go over there and they had a huge grassy yard. They're all sleeping on sleeping bags out in front.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm sure Kelly, if you had ever talked to him about it, that's an early part of his makeup in Hawaii was that.
Just sleeping in a sleeping bag in the yard?
Yeah.
Well, they were definitely more professional because by 92, Kelly won his first title.
Well, yeah, right. But I'm just saying, when this was back in the, I want to say 80s, like late 80s, but yeah, those guys were having fun. They just had a lot of fun, and they brought a lot of fun to the game. Yeah.
Yeah.
But they were sending it, like you said.
Right.
There was none of them were pussies. Excuse my language, but they all charged. Yeah.
I mean, I think they all pushed each other as a group, and without that group, they wouldn't be who they are today.
Yeah. No, that group kind of saved surfing in a sense because it brought it to another level. It's almost like
that's sick.
Magic Johnson and Larry Bird in the NBA. They kind of saved the NBA. But then when Michael Jordan got in there, he took it to another level. Well, Kelly and those guys took surfing to that next place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's super, super incredible to see. But
Taylor Steele was there filming it all.
Yeah. And Taylor Knox, I forgot about him. He's
Taylor Knox,
huge part of the group. Dan Malloy, all those guys, yeah.
Yeah, the Soul Arch bottom turn, right? And
that's that wave in that contest. I can tell you about it. Yeah.
Yeah, but kind of relating back to Gotcha, how long were you team manager for, and when did things for Gotcha kind of start going downhill, and what happened?
Well, I started team manager with them in '86, and I ended up leaving there in '95. And then I came back a couple of years later for a stint, but that was already done. The problem with Gotcha was the leadership at the top. Just got too on drugs. I mean, just plain and simple. Like our boss, if he would have not gone that way, because he was really strong. He was super, super charismatic, super strong personality. Like he was really intense. Narcissist, for sure. But that's what ruined Gotcha, yeah.
Yeah, and then what happened to brands like OP, who were also really big back in the day?
Well, OP, so back in the day, you had to be really careful because we were talking about the grassroots, thing. Yeah. So the grassroots would help keep you in with the surf shops, and the surf shops were the core. So Nordstrom's and Macy's and Bloomingdale's and Neiman Marcus or whatever, the high end.
Yeah.
They wanted what was in the surf shops because they saw how well the brands were doing across the board, like up and down the east and west coast. So they'd want us, but for us to have them, right, we had to be able to keep the grassroots going. Because if we got rid of the grassroots, then the surf shops would tell us to, you know what, and then we wouldn't be able to. We wouldn't be able to cater to them as well. So it's because you had to be hot in the surf shop. So that guy would want you.
Yeah.
And so it was a fine balance that you had to keep going. So that's why I think probably too they let a lot of edge go because, it kept it going that way. But it was a really hard dynamic.
Yeah.
Do you remember in '95 when Quicksilver had the first G-Land event?
Yeah.
Why was that such a big event?
Because G-Land's such a crazy wave. And plus, if you've ever been to G-Land at that time, because I went to G-Land, went to G-Land around that time.
Wow.
So it's really prehistoric. There's a number of things that can kill you. And then there's just things, there's trapdoor spiders, there's tigers, there's Komodo, there's like those big lizards, the Komodo dragons, there's cobras, there's green mambas, there's what are the pigs with the boars? There's wild boars. I mean, there's a slew of stuff that can just ruin your day, and it was really primitive. Like when I went there, we were sleeping in these like tree huts, and I remember I'm sleeping, and Michael Ho, he's across from me, and it's like my foot's there, his head's there, same, because we weren't going to sleep with heads like that, right?
Yeah.
No. So all of a sudden, this rat lands on my toe, and I flick it, and it lands on his face. Oh yeah, he'll kill me for bringing this one up, but that's kind of how it was, and it was crazy. It was a jungle, and if you were there for a while, you could feel the jungle kind of coming in. It was crazy, but that contest, that wave is amazing. When it breaks, it's just absolutely amazing wave.
And the fact that they were able to bring out all their equipment and run a contest out there is incredible.
Yeah.
Like,
there was
unheard of.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff that had to get involved in it. So,
what was it like traveling with boards back in the day?
Well, before fin systems, horrid.
Oh my God! Yeah, would all the fins just snap
because
out?
your fins they'd break your fins.
Almost every time.
Oh, not almost every time, but so you really had to get these foam blocks, and you really had to make sure your fins were on there. And the whole trick to the board bags is your boards aren't loose inside the bag; they're really firm and set and solid. So it's almost like a box. You know what I mean? But it was horrible.
Who made the first board bag for traveling? Because when you watch in the summer, they're Pro-Lite.
Mm-hmm. It was a group of guys. I believe they were flight attendants, and they developed the bag.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's huge.
The other thing that helped out was the fin systems. Because then you can stack boards in there, and you didn't have to worry about your fins.
That makes sense.
That was huge.
When did FCS versus Future come about, and when did those come into the game?
Well, before there was... Oh, God. Before there was Bane fins. Bahne fins. And those were screw-in fins. And then FCS came, and people were riding about... When Futures came, I want to say FCS and Future were about... I want to say FCS was maybe a year before Futures, or a couple of years. Mm-hmm. But the FCS, the problem was the fins sat outside the board, so a lot of that seaweed grass would get stuck in your fin, where the Future fins set down inside.
Yeah.
So that's why...
I remember back in the day, all the FCS fins would just pop out in the seaweed, right? You just hit seaweed and it was...
Yeah, they could pop out, but the problem was that the seaweed grass would get... You know how the fin sits on top of the board?
Yeah.
Like a little bit of it, the seaweed grass would get caught under there.
Because there's just two holes and then there's that center.
And then, for me, being a heavy guy, the Futures were better for me than the FCS. The FCS kind of washed a bit.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then I want to take it back to 1995 when you went to Chopu with the Gotcha team. Tell us a little about that. That was the first time that Chopu was ever filmed, right?
96, I believe.
96.
Yeah. So, I've heard about the spot down there, and I remember Snack Bar Hank, Brian Steffen, but it's Hank Photos in Hawaii. He had already gone down there and shot. He got a cover shot of Eric Barton, Goofy Foot from the South Shore. Crazy left. But anyway, so we took a crew down there. It was Rob Machado, Martin Potter, Brock Little, myself, and a art director, and Snapping Turtle Productions, which is Bella's dad, Jason.
No way. He was Snapping Turtle Productions?
Oh, yeah, and he was down there. So we went down there, and what I did get to see was crazy. Like, and we never got Chopu on that trip like Chopu gets. We kind of saw it get kind of like it, but we never got it how it gets. It wasn't until after that we saw what it really does.
Yeah. What was it like filming there, though, for...
Oh, it was insane because they already had it. The guys there, you got to remember, Tahitians are boatmen. Everybody's got boats. They anchor. They know where this spot, that spot. The only thing about there is if it was boat was going like this, you had to kind of, make sure you kind of keep your
rocket.
But When that first bomb comes in at Chopu and you see it come in, and you're on the boat, and you're attached, right, to the mooring or whatever, and you're looking at it going, and it's coming like this at you, and then it swings. But that first one, if you weren't ready for it, oh, you're ready to jump off the stern and start swimming. Like, oh, you want to get off that boat.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, kind of bringing it back to now, what do you think about surf culture now, and where do you see it kind of going?
Well, it's funny. Surf culture is a funny thing because there's people that really love to surf, and they'll surf no matter what. And that's a surfer to me. It's somebody that surfs. They pretty much kind of their lifestyle is kind of centered around it. As far as the surf culture as a whole, I think like the WSL is neglecting California. I've been saying this forever. We're being neglected here. We just need more here. The culture itself, I'd like to see. Kind of like to see those old surf movies kind of pop back up again. Where they kind of tour the state.
Yeah.
Yeah, and but it's never going to go back to what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just recently, we saw that Volcom, Billabong, Quicksilver, they're not going to have any more shops open in the public.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, and what do you think led to that?
Well, that's when you go public, and you start selling your shares, and what you're really doing is selling your soul in a sense, because you had a story to say, a story to tell. That's how you started the company. Your company, like, Volcom with the stone, and, it was like edgy and this and that. And that's how it all started. And then you go from that, and then all of a sudden you go to a corporate setting, which that's what kind of makes it kind of sterile in a sense.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you got some guy, no offense, but some guy that says he's in Iowa, and he wants to know why there's no inline skating being featured in your videos. You're like, but you're not built that way. You're built on a surf culture, selling that lifestyle, right? So you kind of sell your story, and you lose your story at the same time, and then you lose your being.
Yeah. And it feels like a lot of the surf brands, the Quicksilver, the Board Riders, all those brands are really losing their image. So what do you think is next for surfing and for surf culture? Do you think there's going to be new brands that start up the grassroots way and bring it back? Or do you think it's going to be a couple of years before we see anything like that happening?
Well, I think what's first going to happen is some of the retailers are going to get hit from the warehouse sales these guys are going to have.
Yeah. I mean, I heard someone talking about how there's been crazy warehouse sales recently.
Yep.
How I think I remember him saying he went to a warehouse sale and he was able to buy 20 Captain Fin fins for $10 each or something crazy like that. Filled up his bag with just all you can get Captain Fin fins and all these companies that are going bankrupt.
Yeah. So what'll happen with that is there'll be that, but then they'll be gone.
Wow.
And then once they're gone, then that void's got to get filled up again. So what I see are labels. There's a couple labels that have been around for a little bit, but they're still kind of new. It's like Salty Crew, but they're coming up. And then you've got Dark Seas, you've got Rourke, you've got these different labels, and they're starting to kind of emerge now. And IPD, Florence Marine. I mean, these are kind of new labels, and they've got some. They have a story.
Yeah.
And it's not muted, and it's not
You can tell the difference between those brands and these Quicksilver, Billabong that have sold all their shares and now are what do the shareholders what do they care about versus what do John and Nathan Florence care about?
Right.
It's pretty.
Yeah,
it's pretty clear.
They're not authentic, and they lost their authenticity. And but anyway, like I said, I think it's exciting because this kind of happened a long time ago, and from that, Volcom became huge. They kind of was just like these other companies I was talking about. So
it's a cycle.
So it's exciting. It's a cycle, but it's really hard for the retailer. And the one thing I would really stress is that instead of buying Amazon, go to the surf shop, your local surf shop, and support your local surf shop, because your local surf shop supports team riders. They're the ones that have the first sponsorships. The local surf shops hire kids that are surfers that need a job so they can surf on the side. The local surf shops, they're the ones that might throw a contest. And they're the ones that have the surfboards, and they're the ones that are carrying kind of the lifeblood or whatever. They're the last, like, edgy group of whatever, to the public. So, support your local surf shop.
100%.
Yeah.
Completely agree with you. Without the local surf shop, like every community has their local surf shop, and it creates that community around it. Like the Frog House in Newport, Killer Dana and Dana Point. Like everyone knows about those two spots.
Yeah.
And it brings the entire community there.
Oh yeah, and then here in Laguna you got Laguna Surf and Sport, right? But what's really cool about old authentic surf shops is they're going to have photos. They're going to have some history of the guys that surfed on the team, history of the local breaks and stuff like that. They usually have that kind of stuff around. And they might have some boards laying around that were some guys' boards. And that's when it's fun, because there's a bit of conversation and, you're not afraid to walk into the place with sandy feet, whereas some places like you can't do that at all. So
yeah, and shout out Killer Dana because they were my first real sponsor, and they've been so incredibly supportive. So I'm right there with you. I feel like surf shops have such an impact, and they were a really big foundation in my personal surfing career and getting started, and having someone back me like that and having a community of people like first back me, believing me. It all starts local, and it all starts with your surf shop. So yeah. I 100% back that message.
I appreciate that. What's crazy about Killer Dana is when I was a little guy, that was my dad's favorite spot. And you saw that picture of me holding my board.
Yeah.
So then that was my dad's favorite spot. I was there before it was a before the harbor. Now it's all this way. Now I'm working at a place called Killer Dana.
Yeah.
Oh, my dad would be really happy. Like, he loved that place. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a full circle moment. Yeah. And it used to be a really good wave back in the day, right? Before the harbor was built. Yeah.
It used to be deemed kind of a big wave.
Yeah.
But it would be like, now it'd be a fun wave though. Kind of punchy, but not real hollow, but like, get turns on.
Yeah. And I have a question kind of relating. We were talking about this earlier, but in terms of judging and how judging is now for the WSL, do you think there's been more bad calls now or back in the day?
Oh, judging's way better now than it used to be. I mean, like, when you see the head judge sitting on the beach smoking a doob and drinking a beer at 6 a.m. before your heat, judging's a lot better now.
Is that how it was back in the day? Just like, wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
I watched this red.
The only reason I can say this, my dad goes, "Hey, who's that?" And I go, "That's our judge." And he goes, "You're in trouble." I was like, "Yeah, I guess we are." But
did you have any bad calls competing growing up that you were pissed about, or any specific?
Oh God, yes. Oh yeah, ton. Like
anything you can do about it?
No, you just kind of had to come back to the next one. The main thing which you had to do was like, you get mad, but you didn't want to like cause a scene or get too mad, but you had to come back and fight harder from it. And there's one thing I can say for kids that are surfing, they're out in their heat and they get a really bad wave. Don't kick out like lame. Mm-hmm. Timmy Patterson, he has a perfect word for it. Claim to lame. Don't claim to lame. If you're having a bad heat, you have a bad wave, just kick out and go back out and get another one. But the other thing about surfing, you don't want to, and I've told you this before, is that you want to be so neutral that all they can judge you on is your surfing.
Yeah.
You don't want to have them be opposites of you in religion or politics or music or whatever it is. You just want to be, so that's a part of the pros that I see, because back then they used to judge you on your personality and your lifestyle rather than your surfing ability.
Wow, that's crazy. Were there any specific bad calls where you saw like surfers getting pushed through because of their personality or because the judges really liked them as a person?
Well, I saw some heats that were crazy, like Sean Thompson at Sunset getting barreled on the inside bowl, and he didn't, and Elkerton won it. And there's no way Elkerton won it. He was riding these big peaks down the beach, but he was kind of S-ing. He wasn't. Here's Sean getting barreled. I mean, I don't know how they could compare it. There's one though. There's a couple. One in particular though, and I told you this about Slater at Lowers.
Yeah.
And he was against Bruce Irons and a couple other guys. And he hadn't surfed in like, I want to say 3 weeks, because he would go on these boat trips and then the next contest was Lowers, so he wouldn't surf. But
He just between the contest and the boat trip, he just wouldn't surf for 3 weeks.
Yeah, because the boat trips, the waves are so perfect, and lowers is fairly gutless.
Yeah.
So anyway, whether that's true or not, but that's what I had heard. But he had this one heat, and we always loved to watch him surf lowers. But I'll never forget this wave because he took off on it, and it was about probably like a 4-foot wave, maybe a little bit bigger. It wasn't that big, but that was a set wave. Anyway, he took off on it. He does snap, and then he threw it up onto the top of the roof, and then he aired off of it. And when he aired off of it, he went into a soul arch bottom turn, threw the tail out, back into another soul arch bottom turn, straight up snap, back into another soul arch bottom turn, and got the tail to drift into a floater and into a snap.
Wow.
They gave him a 5.5. At that time, I had the head judge's cell phone number, and I was speed dialing it with Potter. We were so pissed off.
You and Potter were on the beach
we
just
were
freaking
pissed.
out?
Yeah, we couldn't believe it because this guy, I mean, it's like what he did was, it was everything you wanted. Power, speed, flow, and creativity. I mean, I've never seen a wave surf better in my life. They got like a 5.5. I was about keeled over.
And what did the head judge say when you?
Well, we caught up to him later. He wasn't answering his phone, obviously.
And what did he say later?
Oh, he didn't like Slater.
No way, he didn't like Slater, so
No.
he just gave him a 5.5.
That's the envy.
Wow.
I just, it was just one of those guys, yeah.
That's crazy. I mean, we've seen some bad calls in surfing, but I feel like recently there's been a few, like Nat Young. I don't know if you remember when they gave him like a 4 and
on the Gold Coast.
Yeah, on the Gold Coast, in the Challenger Series where he took off.
It was an 8.
And it was an 8 for sure. 8 all day long.
Yeah.
He took off, did like 5 vertical snaps like in a row, and you know how Nat's backhand is. It's like when he throws it up there's so much speed, power, flow, checks all the boxes. But everyone was freaking out. But it's interesting how like nowadays, the minute there's a bad call or anything questionable, you go on social media and there's instantly like 5,000 people commenting about it. Like if you go onto Nat Young's post, you'll see like 8,000 people like calling WSL out, like trashing them. WSL even had to make an Instagram post apologizing about Nat Young's score. So I think that's a really big thing, keeping them in check nowadays with social media, is like if you make a bad call, like instantly everyone's calling you out on it. Where maybe back in the day it was just like you and Potter who are gonna like say something about it, but it's, you know, it's not live streamed. There's no social media.
It was a lot different. Like but now they get called out more. But there's still some rough ones.
Yeah. I definitely think. I think it's part of surfing. There's always some calls that are questionable, and I guess that's the thing is when style isn't a part of the criteria. There's always gonna be some, you know.
Style to me is a big part of surfing, and it should be a big part of the criteria.
I think so too. Because I feel like it definitely should be integrated into it.
Yeah,
more,
we don't want to look like drunk monkeys. I mean, it's just, right?
I know who you're referencing in that, but I'm not gonna say his name. No, we're not gonna say anything.
Happy. What would you like to leave any future surfers or anyone with inspiring words?
Just surf because you love it, and when you surf, if you want to get really good, you got to surf with a purpose. If you just want to cruise, and cruise, but if you want to get really good, you got to surf with a purpose. You got to practice with a purpose.
Well said.
Yeah.
Happy. It's been fantastic having you on the show. Thank you for sharing your insights and experiences with us. To our listeners, make sure to follow Happy's work. Keep up with him and all of our latest projects. You can find him at the Killer Dana Surf Shop. Where can they follow your story?
They can follow my story on Killer Dana Surf Shop Instagram or come in the shop.
Awesome.
Yeah, well, Happy, again, thank you so much. It's been so amazing having you on the podcast. And I know it's been a guest that I've been wanting to have on for a long time. Yeah, you taught me how to surf, and you taught me everything I know about surfing, and for that I'm infinitely grateful because I genuinely couldn't imagine my life without this sport.
I appreciate that.
Stay tuned for our next episode, and thank you for listening.
Yep.
Thank you, Happy.